And we're coming up to the last 10 minutes of Paris Live PM today. And live on live, we're talking about Schengen. 31 years ago today, in 1985, 5 European countries gathered in the Luxembourg town of that name and agreed to abolish border controls between them. Today, the Schengen zone includes 26 countries, 22 EU members, and 4 others. But it's facing a lot of challenges with immigration, terrorism, European politics in general, the Eurozone issues. To talk about all of this and the evolution, I'm joined today by Yves Bertoncini. He's the head of the Jacques Delors Institute, a European think tank here in Paris. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
So, at the origin, the Schengen Agreement was about getting rid of travel and trade barriers for Europeans. Today, with all these challenges, they kind of seem insurmountable. You wonder if a lot of these problems aren't due to a lack of border controls. Shouldn't we just put them back in place? Go back to how it was?
It's important. Yes, it's true to say that Schengen is facing kind of stress test. We could even say a crash test. But it's also important to remind what was at stake when it was created. And you have mentioned it, which is basically the economic interdependence between 5 countries. Actually, it all started between only 2 countries in Saarbrück before, France and Germany.
France and Germany.
Simply for very basic reasons, because there were too many queues of lorry drivers.
Saarbrück is right on the border.
Precisely. Then lorry drivers, daily commuters, and then too much economic interdependence for a very low efficiency as regard border control. Because if you were to maintain border control in such context, what was certain is the annoyance for those popular people, if I may say, daily commuters, lorry drivers. Also, the customs officers were complaining because they could not do their job correctly. And in terms of efficiency, they could not block any criminal or terrorist at the borders. So they complained as well to say that in terms of cost efficiency, this is not valid any longer.
So we're looking at an economic efficiency plan that was put in place to allow basically people to cross borders for an economic reason. But today we're faced with much more than that, of course. We're talking crime, we're talking terrorism. Doesn't it maybe seem outdated? Shouldn't the economics be second place to that?
Then this economic interdependence is even more developed today, but you're right to say that there are other challenges.
Yeah.
External challenges mainly, meaning terrorists coming from the Middle East or sometimes at home.
Sure,
then,
and
but
crossing
of course,
borders
inspired
internally.
by the Middle East and then moving quite freely within the border, within the Schengen area. And also asylum seekers. And that's what at stake as regards border control, national border controls put in place, which is absolutely possible. Schengen is flexible. When, for example, a country like Germany or Austria decides to reinstate border controls temporarily, it's not a suspension of Schengen, it's an implementation of Schengen, a clause, safeguard clause.
And that's existing right now. I think 6 countries have reinstated.
Only 6, I would say. 6,
only
because
6.
There was a period where it was a bit more than 6. Now it's only 6 left, including France for 2 basic reasons, meaning the Euro Championship football and then the Tour de France. So it's temporary. But why is it not efficient? For terrorism, it is not at all. You don't see any terrorist arrested at the border.
Sure.
Be it national or external, by the way.
You mean if the borders are put back into place in the border checks?
Yes, in fact, you don't. But it could be efficient if it was used against, if I may say, the massive influx of asylum seekers. Because it was a political signal sent to them, sent to the smugglers as well, just to say, well, don't come to Germany, for example, because now you will be controlled at the border. So don't come. It was a political communication game.
So this was a good idea to reinstate these border controls to deal with the asylum issue.
It's if you just want to not to fix the problem, but if you want them to go to your neighbor, this is a good idea, a good national idea. But of course, you don't solve at all the collective problem.
What is the collective problem? Which
was a massive inflows of asylum seekers. And for them, there was a need to act at source. The source is Syria. It's easier said than done, but this is a problem, the conflict in Syria. And there was another source, which was the transit countries out of Europe, for example, Turkey, because asylum seekers are massively in Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon. And for this, there was a need for a partnership with these source countries, if I may say. But there was a final point, a final step, and it's underway, which was to reinforce the borders at the external borders, not between Germany and Austria, for example, Denmark
Talking
and
about
Sweden.
Greece mostly, or
Precisely.
Italy.
And what is underway now is a kind of federal leap in favor of the creation of a European system of border guard, border control in Greece, in Italy, in any countries where there was a mistrust from the others in their capacities and in their will to keep efficiently our border controls.
You bring up this idea of trust and
Yes.
mistrust, and I think a lot of the Schengen is to do with this sort of psychological, will my neighbor countries respect the laws or only act in their own interest? You say that reinstating border controls works to deal with asylum in terms of each country's individual needs. Why not just keep them in place permanently then?
Precisely because that would create a massive cost for lorry drivers.
So we go back to the idea of the economic
Precisely,
impacts.
that was at the root of the Schengen Agreement. And that's precisely why there's a race against the time between this possibility given to the states back to the national controls and it's underway, the creation of efficient control at the external borders, and namely in Greece and Italy.
Would that give countries like Hungary, or rather, I think it's Austria, Germany? What are the countries that have put in temporary borders? France, Austria, Denmark, Germany,
And
Norway, and Sweden.
Yes.
Would that reinforcement really give them the confidence that actually they can then reopen their borders again and deal with this asylum issue?
I do believe so, simply when you look at the figures. Because if today you look at the figures, you see that the influx of asylum seekers from Turkey to Greece has dramatically decreased. It's very, very, very low. And now there's general ideas. And the target was not only Greece, was Germany. The idea that Germany had welcomed too many asylum seekers, that the flow was not under control any longer. The situation today is more under control, at least as regards Greece and Turkey.
Right.
There
then
could
we say
be
Libya and Italy.
Yes, of course, you're right. There could be another front, if I may say, from Libya to Italy. Yes.
So it seems like there's a constant push and pull, like temporarily closing, sending the message, people go elsewhere. But ultimately, how does this get solved? Because what happens then, I get the impression, is in countries themselves, it gets used politically. Say, here there are calls from the far right saying, let's just pull out of Schengen completely. We need to get more control over our national borders. And that seems to be having some weight with people who maybe instinctively say that makes more sense.
There's a mythology of, the very overrated protective potential of national borders. It's part of the mythology.
You think it's overrated, though?
Absolutely. You don't see, again, if you look at asylum, take France as an example. If you look at the asylum seekers, there's no massive inflows to France.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Well, France isn't necessarily being very welcoming either.
It was absolutely. But there was another real threat, which was terrorist attacks. But all the terrorists, they were not blocked at the borders, not simply because there was no border control. Yes, there were border controls after the 13th of November. In reality, there were border controls on the 13th of November, simply because France was to organize COP21, on climate change. So they were there.
And they were Belgian citizens coming in.
But there were absolutely not enough police cooperation, intelligence exchanges between the countries, and then is the key.
And that's part of Schengen. And that's part of Schengen too. It's not just border control. There is this exchange of information. That's part of that treaty, right?
Schengen is not only an area; it's a toolbox.
People forget this,
and that's absolutely crucial to underline this point, because if you, for example, you take the Schengen, so-called Schengen Border Code, you have more than 130 articles, the majority of which deal with police and justice cooperation. And it's all the more true that, for example, the UK, which is not in Schengen for the aspects of freedom, they are in reality involved in police and justice cooperation, because they know
that part of Schengen,
pragmatically that you don't block a terrorist at a border. He doesn't declare himself a terrorist. You need to act at source. Then you need to act in Syria, but you need to act in Belgium, in France, in London. You need to cooperate more. You don't protect people on the line. You protect them acting at source, meaning in our territories, cooperating with each other.
So when people complain about Schengen letting in too many migrants and terrorists, you say, no, don't go with your gut. Don't say close the borders. We actually need more Schengen, not less Schengen.
I think people are basically convinced that you need to act at source. They just need to have the impression that the situation is under control. And for example, as regard the asylum seekers flows, they had the real impression, a true impression that it was not under control any longer. So in this context, it's logic to have the idea to come back temporarily at national borders. But on the medium run, yes, of course, the good solution is to have a European border guard corps at the border of Greece, Italy, so to reduce the mistrust, so to be certain that there is a real control, including in transit countries like Greece and Italy. And then, if it's about fighting against terrorism, of course, the answer is a collective one. They are not at the borders; they are in our places, in our countries, and they are in Syria. So there's need not to work on the line, but to work at home and abroad together.
Well, I'm going to have to leave it at that. Thanks to Yves Bertoncini of the Jacques Delors Institute here in Paris. Thanks for being on RFI. And this is Paris Live PM. Stay with us.